see how we can wake everyone up and keep them occupied, and there you go. Right, let's begin. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second webinar of the St. Julian Scholars. And for those joining us today, it's a pleasure to see you all, or not see you, but be here. And thank you for forgetting about the build-up of the England game and taking time out of your busy days, those who have got full hotels on the coast and the provinces, and those who are in London trying to find business. Just thank you for taking this, hopefully a very, very informative and really well worth hour out of your busy schedules. So I will now hand over to Dr. Rosina Watson, who will go through about sustainability. And I must say, you've got a background which most people will be very proud of indeed, and it's sort of listed that long that I can't go into all the details, but you've worked for the likes of Argos Homebase, and then we've got Shell, ITV, Carphone Warehouse, and Home Retail Group as well, to say the very few, and there's more. But thank you very much for joining us today, and we're super excited to have you here and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And be warned, everybody, it's quite interactive by the sounds of it. So let's see how you get on.
Yeah, we'll do as much as we can. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you today, and welcome St. Julian Scholars. I think that's a fantastic name, by the way. Sounds very erudite. So as Nick said, I've got a long background in business. Most of it, actually, I have to say, the last 15 years spent at Argos and Homebase. I normally have to explain to international students what Argos is, but I'm sure most of you know. So I've got a background in finance and commercial, but when I was at Argos, they invited me to be their first ever head of CSR back in 2009. And that's when I totally fell in love with the fact that I could have a job, I could work in a business, I could help that business do well and make money, but I could also be improving our social and environmental impact. So it got to the point where I was so passionate about that, I moved to Cranfield, did a PhD, and now I'm a lecturer in sustainability. So St. Julian Scholars and Master in holders have got a long history with Cranfield, so I'm really delighted to be invited to speak to you all here today. It's worth noting that hospitality is one of the industries I haven't worked in. So some of my examples come from your sector, some of them don't, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But I think now is a really good time to be thinking about sustainability. I know things are really tough for you on a day-to-day basis, whether you're too busy and not enough staff or not busy enough. But I think at the same time, what COVID has done has shown us how vulnerable we all are as a global community to big global crises, that we haven't really got control of nature, and that we are at the mercy of these crises that can hit us. And there's something positive, I think, to be taken from COVID, and that we found out how quickly we can change and adapt and innovate in the face of a crisis when we really have to. So I think it's about learning from that and thinking about, as we build back, as we get back to a bit more of normality, how we can both mitigate the future crises that face us and also adapt to the changes that will be happening. So in this session, I'm going to talk about what sustainability is, what challenges, opportunities there are, what changes there are coming at us from both an environmental and a social perspective, and how, as businesses, if we respond to those challenges proactively, strategically, positively, that can help us be more successful businesses in the long run. So I'm going to share my screen now, hopefully, and walk you through some slides which tell a bit of a story about what sustainability is and why it should be important to you and your businesses. So the first thing to say is, as I've just said, we're all struggling with this first tidal wave of COVID and the economic recession that's likely or possibly going to be following behind that. But the impact of COVID is dwarfed by the potential impacts that climate change will bring with us. But the problem is that climate change seems a bit further away, and we're very good at humans responding to a crisis now, but less good as a slow building crisis that's coming behind it. But we don't have any choice. We can't go back to business as usual. We need to go back to business that's better prepared for these future crises, climate change and associated impacts. So just in case you don't know, some people still don't, climate change is caused by the Earth's atmosphere capturing more heat from the sun, so creating a blanket so that the heat that comes in from the sun can no longer escape. So as the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere increases, the global climate is warming. And this chart just shows how dramatically that's been happening over the last few decades. So the scale on the left is parts per million of CO2, the scale on the right is temperature increases. And even though that we've known that this is actually happening, that we've known scientifically that CO2 in the atmosphere causes this warming, we're still burning fossil fuels at an even ever increasing rate. In the UK, we are rebalancing and moving towards more renewable sources. So in the summer last year, we're up to about 50%. There was a few months that we were running on zero coal. But globally, there is still an acceleration in burning of fossil fuels. And what's this global warming going to mean in terms of the effects that has on us globally? So this is some work that's been done around the effects at 1.1 degrees warming. And as you might know, at the Paris Agreement, the countries that signed up to that agreement are trying to reduce climate change to 1.5 degrees. These effects are at 1.1 degrees. So in terms of drought, by 2050, these figures are all by 2050, which again, sometimes seems a bit far away, but it's 29 years. I've got a son who's 10, my youngest son's 10. When he's 39, in the middle of his life, these things are going to be starting to happen or happening. So over 3 billion people suffering from extreme drought. And then at the same time, 40 million people being threatened by flooding. We've seen unprecedented levels of wildfires across the globe in Australia and California and even in Siberia, and also in the UK. So 2019 was the worst year ever in the UK for fires. Not only were they burning more frequently, they were burning through the year, not just through the traditional fire season. Sea level rises. So for 340 million people threatened by floods in 2050. And you can see the locations around the world where that will be happening, including the UK. So these global problems causing a massive displacement of people as well. So these physical impacts that are going to be created in weather systems are going to driving much higher levels of migration, with up to 1 billion displaced by 2050, and another billion living in insufferable heat in countries around the equator. And to add to that, there's this concept of feedback loops. So the problem is even the top scientists don't know exactly what the accelerating impact is going to have, climate change is going to have, because as the ice caps and the North and South Pole melt, that means there's less ice to reflect heat. So as the ice melts, the sea is going to absorb even more heat, and nobody really knows what that will mean in terms of acceleration of this warming process. This is the little graph that I find really useful from the World Resources Institute, which describes the fact that there's a big difference between 1.5 degrees warming and 2 degrees warming. It doesn't seem very much to us if we think about, half a degree difference, but it's really important that we try and keep the temperature increase as low as possible. And this chart shows some of the differences between that 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. So at the top, for example, the proportion of the global population who will be exposed to severe heat at least once every 5 years will be 2.5 times worse with that half a degree increase in temperature. And you can see there, for example, crop yields, the reduction in maize harvest will be 3% at 1.5 degrees, but over double that, 7% reduction at 2 degrees. So every degree matters. Even though this might seem like something that's far off, 2050 might seem like it's far off, the IPCC has said we've got to halve our global emissions in the next 10 years to have any chance of reaching this 1.5 degree warming or less. And we all know it's a global phenomenon, but we're absolutely feeling the impacts of it already significantly in the UK in terms of heat waves, flooding, as it says there, the Welsh village in Fairborn likely to be decommissioned because it's just too expensive and too difficult to keep the waters away. So even in my little small holding that I've got at home, I've got 6 sheep. We've had sheep dying, lambs dying because it's been too cold overnight in April, and lambs getting infested with mites because it's too hot now, and they haven't been sheared. So this effect is being felt in the agriculture and on our daily lives already. I know this is a bit depressing. I promise it gets more upbeat from this, but very relevant to you in the industry that you work in, where you're sourcing, big amounts of food. There's some really sort of, I find, quite shocking statistics about the way that we grow food to feed ourselves. So over 80% of farmland is used for animals, which themselves provide only 18% of our calories. So we're not doing this in the most efficient way in order to meet the food needs of our global population. And just a little quiz here to make sure that you're all awake. If you wouldn't mind posting your ideas and your answers in the chat. So if you think about all the mammals that are on our planet now, so that includes humans, that includes wild animals, elephants, giraffes, wildebeest, and livestock. So domesticated animals, pigs, sheep, what the other one? Cows. What percentage by mass do you think that domesticated livestock makes up globally? So Rob thinks 30%. So all humans, all livestock, all wild animals, how much is the livestock proportion? Laura's raising it to 40, Sue's 45, Edward's gone really high, 96%. Any other takers? Joanne, 59, 57, 50, so we're kind of thinking around the half. Okay, I'll let you know the answer. So that's the answer, 60%. So Joe, I think Joanne, you were pretty close with your 57. Nick was on the nose with 60, teacher's pet. So yes, globally, we think of wild animals roaming around Africa, but actually we are turning the planet into a monoculture, both in terms of crops. The 3 biggest crops in the world take up about 65% of land mass, and domesticated livestock taking up representing 60% of mammals on the planet. And as you know, raising cattle in particular has big consequences for climate change, because not only the land use that is involved in growing crops to feed them, but also in the methane emitted from cows. Thank you for taking part in that quiz, well done. And alongside that, so increasing proportion of mammals represented are livestock, but mammals themselves, 25% of mammal species under threat of extinction, and a really big problem with insects. So insects are the base of most food supply chains, and 41% of insect types are under threat. And this is actually having a direct economic effect in some areas of the world as well, in terms of bee populations. Other populations of insects that are being wiped out, they're key for pollinating crops. So 75% of the world's crops are pollinated by insects. If those insects no longer exist, we have to find another way to pollinate our crops. So in California, for example, they're having to ship bees around to pollinate the almond crops because there aren't enough bees to do it naturally. So at the same time as these environmental problems facing us, we're still experiencing very high levels of social inequality and social issues globally. So as you can see there, the world's 8 richest people having the same wealth as the poorest 50%. Is that really a world that we want to be creating for ourselves? And particularly relevant in some areas of the world, in the hospitality industry, there is still big issues with things such as working conditions and at the extreme modern slavery, which exists not only in developing countries but in the UK as well. And there's, as we've seen over the last year, growing awareness that this lack of diversity and lack of equality, and the sort of increasing gulf between the haves and the have-nots, that those that benefit from our economy and those that don't, isn't something that's going to be good for us as a global community in the long term. So a lot more awareness of issues of diversity and equality, not just gender or racial, but also disability, around sexual orientation, and a lot more movements, social movements around these issues that companies are really having to recognise. And diversity is a good thing for all businesses in terms of your ability to represent the communities that you're serving, the customers that you're serving, and also your ability to be creative, to have multiple points of view. So it's been demonstrated that companies with more diversity perform better from a profitability point of view, from an innovation point of view. So these social and environmental issues are those that we're thinking about how to address positively when we're thinking about sustainability in a business. And many of these issues that I've talked about are very much interconnected. So this is a picture from the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report. So every year they publish a report that describes and evaluates the biggest risks that are facing us as a globe at the moment. And you can see the lines linking them show their connections. So you can see infectious diseases is on there at the top left. That it wasn't one of the biggest risks on the register back in 2020. It is now in 2021. But that's linked, as you can see, to biodiversity loss, for example. It's linked to water crises, because as we put pressure on the planet and we experience things like water shortages, and biodiversity loss means that animals are moving out of their natural habitats. That is linked to issues such as infectious diseases. So very interrelated issues that we're facing. You've probably heard of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals are our attempt at, as a global community, to describe the sort of future that we want to have. How are we going to try and resolve the issues that I've just been talking about? So they're often presented as a block of 17 goals, but I think it's more useful to think about them like this. So there's a set of goals about around the planet, the biosphere itself. So life on land, life on water, climate action being the key ones there. There's also a set of goals about how we live as a society, depending on the things that the planet provides for us. There's then a layer around how we run the economy. And then running through that is this idea of partnership and working between organisations, between sectors, between government, between business, between civil society to try and address these massive issues that we're all facing. So this concept of partnership very much sees businesses, commercial activities as a part of the solution as well as being part of the problem. That's very much about how I see our role as business leaders in contributing to solving the problems that I've just been talking about. So if that's the case, there's a kind of movement at the moment that's saying, actually, we need to think very differently about what a business is actually there to do. Is a business really just there to make profit, or is it about something bigger than that? And there's some work that's been done, led by Professor Colin Mayer at Oxford University, which talks about this, the purpose of a business being to profitably solve problems of people and planet and not profit from causing problems. So turning the concept of what the purpose of a business is on its head. The element of profit is still there. We all need profits as an engine to run our organizations, but that profit should be a means to an end rather than an ultimate goal. So quite a challenging way to think about a business differently. But this is something that's really coming through in the financial sphere as well. So it's really coming through amongst investors. This, you may recognize him. He's Larry Fink. So he heads up BlackRock, which is the biggest investment company on the planet, with about 7 trillion now actually of assets under investment, which is about 3 times the size of Germany. Sorry, my camera keeps freezing. And he writes a letter every year to the CEOs of the companies that he invests in. And in his 2021 letter, he wrote this. So he wrote, a company cannot achieve long-term profits without embracing purpose and considering the needs of a broad range of stakeholders. So we'll talk about stakeholders in a minute, but he's saying in the long term, you won't be successful. You can't just go after profit. That won't lead to long-term success. You have to have this purpose that goes beyond profit to enable you to endure and be successful in the long term. And at the end there, purpose is the engine of long-term profitability. So a problem in the financial sector has been its short-termism. It's been its focus on what are your quarterly earnings, I'm going to get in, buy shares, sell them 3 months later, or not even that. So I'm not really interested in your long-term performance. But the financial sector is waking up to the fact that it's sustainable businesses that are going to be around, that's going to weather these challenging things that are coming our way, these crises, these changes that are coming our way, and that are going to be a more successful investment in the long term. So that's been a big change in the last 2 years, and one that gives me cause for optimism. We live in a capitalist system. Even if we might want to change that system in the long run, in the short term, that is the system we have. So if the money is moving more in the right direction, that gives me cause for optimism. So this is an example of a hotel group that has been explicit about its purpose and the way that purpose connects in to the well-being of a broader set of stakeholders beyond just their shareholders. So this is IHG, Hotels and Resorts, talking about their purpose being true hospitality for good. So they're being explicit about the fact they want to make a difference to people, guests and communities and protect the world around us. And do that through engaging a wide range of stakeholders. So if you're serious about having a purpose beyond profit, you need to really be thinking about, who are my stakeholders? Who are the people that I'm here to serve? So in the old days, it was very easy. This is good old Milton Friedman, who in the 1970s talked about the fact that the only social responsibility of business to make was to increase its profit. So it was very easy to be a manager. You knew who you're accountable for, and making profit was your primary accountability. But Milton Friedman assumed that markets were perfect and that there weren't any externalities. So externalities are positive or negative impacts that a firm causes that it doesn't pay the cost for. So something like pollution or CO2 emissions is an externality. You can do it and you don't have to pay for it. So he assumed there wasn't externalities and that everything would adjust through a market system. But we know now that that's not true. If we don't put a value on something, whether positive or negative, nothing gets done. And there's this concept of this tragedy of the commons that we talk about in sustainability, where if something's available for free, so back to the sheep theme, if you've got common grazing land, for example, and it's free to use, individually you're incentivized to use as much as possible, but collectively that's a bad outcome, because it means that valued asset is then degraded and destroyed and no one can use it. So a more modern way and more relevant way of looking at businesses and their accountability is to think about stakeholders. So this is Edward Freeman who first coined this definition of stakeholders. So thinking about any identifiable group or individual who can affect or is affected by the achievement of your organization's objectives. So managers now have to think about all the different groups that they affect, that they rely on, or who they impact, and try and create value for that broader set of stakeholders rather than just shareholders. And I'd argue that probably in the long term, this idea of stakeholders and shareholders converges, as Larry Fink does, because if you do serve your stakeholders better, you'll be a better business in the long term. So who are stakeholders? So this is a kind of a list of the people that we typically consider to be the stakeholders of a business. But obviously for different businesses, different stakeholders might be more significant, more relevant, more powerful, more influential. But it's consumers. What are their changing needs and expectations of you? What do your investors, what do they expect? What do they need from you? How can they affect you? But also society. What does society think? What are their expectations? What are the norms about what's acceptable and in terms of how to do business? Have you got NGOs that are campaigning against you that you need to be thinking about? And then also your supply chain partners, so your suppliers or those that you supply. How do they impact you? What are their changing needs and wants? And really critically, your employees. You know, we're all people, we're all individuals who play these roles. So all stakeholder groups are made up of individuals. So what employees are wanting from their business, from their employers is changing. They want to work for businesses where they can feel happy and confident that they're doing something positive in their daily work. So these stakeholders that we think of, being the broad set of people that we serve as a business, they obviously have different drivers, different routes through which they can influence us. So consumers will either buy from us or they won't buy from us. They might even boycott us. And government will make laws, so pass legislation that will have an impact on how we can do business. NGOs might campaign against us, or they might actually work with us in trying to solve problems. And employees as well, they might campaign against you, they might strike, but on the positive side, they might be much more engaged, more productive, offer much better customer service if they are feeling positive about the company that they work for. So this is a really useful way, I think, of thinking about the sustainability challenges you face in your business and what your stakeholders want and need from you, and how you can bring value to them in the context of these issues we've just been talking about. The other thing to bear in mind in terms of stakeholders is in the old days, I keep talking about the old days like an old biddy, but power tended to sit within institutions. So we could be quite sort of certain about, you know, there's government, there's businesses, maybe there's some charities, maybe there's Greenpeace that do some campaigning. But that's very much changing. This is a really interesting book about new power, about the different way which power is exerted in the world. And as you can see there in that slide, this is a presentation that was made of the book. It's much more about people coalescing around issues, campaigning around issues. Social media has absolutely enabled this. So civil society can sort of move very quickly in a particular direction in terms of being for something or against something, and that's a new power force that we need to be aware of. And that's come out very strongly on the social side with the Me Too campaign, where something that's been entrenched in society has been radically challenged. And on the more positive side, Greta Thunberg with her campaign to raise awareness around climate change, to really ask the difficult questions of world leaders, politicians, and to take so many people with her. So on one of the most popular Fridays of the Friday strike for the climate, there were 6 million children around the world all striking on the same day at the same time around the same issue. So that's kind of unprecedented that we have that groundswell of support around a particular issue. So the story is that these social and environmental issues can have a huge impact on your business. They can have direct impacts in terms of, you know, coping with really hot weather when you've got no air conditioning, having a hotel that's flooded. They can impact your ability to get a hold of the raw materials that you need, water, food. But they can also affect, there is big changes afoot in terms of the way customers think about your products and services. There's changes in what employees expect, and then therefore what you need to do to attract and retain talent. Changes in legislation, and also technological change. So very many moving parts and very many direct impacts that these issues can have on your business, for the good and for the bad. So just a quick definition, this is from my teaching slides. So when we're talking about corporate sustainability, it's about how a business responds to these issues. So how do you embrace the opportunities and manage the risks associated with these economic, environmental and social developments? And it's got two underlying things that feed into it. One's this idea of sustainable development, which is about meeting future needs, the needs of future generations as well as our own. So that intergenerational fairness idea. And then this idea of triple bottom line. So instead of just thinking about the bottom line of profit, thinking about the triple bottom line of profit, planet, and people, because you believe that actually, if I don't look after people and planet, then I won't be able to be profitable into the long term. So that's what corporate sustainability is. That's my definition of corporate sustainability. So why should we care as businesses? So we should care. We've got there's kind of a moral obligation, a moral responsibility on us, as this quote says from this book, which I would highly recommend. The pressures we face are so large and intertwined, and the time so short that we all need to work together. Every government, community, business, individual needs to work together towards solving them. But alongside that, there is also an opportunity. So Peter Drucker, a management guru who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, he said, every single social and global issue of our day is a business opportunity in disguise. So thinking about responding, if we respond positively to these issues, it can be an opportunity for us. This report back in 2017 tried to estimate the market opportunity available for those sectors that were trying to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and estimated that at $12 trillion. So across these four categories: food and agriculture, cities, energy and materials, health and well-being. Hospitality sort of features there in terms of number 11 under cities of cultural tourism, but just trying to make the point that, you know, these changes, responding, a change is always often represents an opportunity. So going after these opportunities is there for us. This is a publication I read recently from Green Hotels, which is entitled, as you can see, How to Increase Your Bottom Line by Going Green. So some, you know, good ideas there, which we'll expand on in a few minutes, about how responding to these issues can actually present an opportunity. And this is a good way of thinking about it, I think. So responding proactively in the right way to sustainability can drive value for you as a business in 4 key ways. So it's easy to remember. So they can mitigate risk, they can reduce your costs, they can increase the trust that you have from your stakeholders, and also drive growth, ideally driving growth without using more stuff. So we'll come back to that when we touch on circular economy. So we want to be thinking about ways to respond to these issues that do one or many of those 4 things. So if you're at the beginning of your sustainability journey, as I was very much when I started at Argos, there are so many opportunities to do things that reduce cost, as well as have a positive environmental impact. So being less wasteful, using less energy, using things more than once, recycling, etc. A lot of those have an investment up front, but drive cost reductions. But there's also this idea of building for the future. So increasing trust, whether that's your customer reputation or your employee reputation, or differentiating yourself through a brand that has this reputation for sustainability, which sits very closely alongside quality, I think, in most customers' eyes. And then driving growth, so making yourself a supplier of choice, making yourself a destination of choice, or actually driving really significant disruptive innovation in your marketplace. So you could argue that that's something that Airbnb did. So that was a concept of using resources, using empty buildings, empty houses, apartments, using them more efficiently does have sustainability benefits from that perspective, and they drove a massive disruption in the market. So mitigate risk, reduce cost, increase trust, and drive growth is the mantra in terms of the value creation opportunity from sustainability. And this is just a nice slide that's very simple but very effective, that I did some work with Adnams. They have sustainability right at the center of their brand and their story and their DNA as a company. They show this slide to everybody in their induction, and they talk about the fact that looking after not only their economic impact, but also their social and environmental impact is great business. And they describe in this chart on the right-hand side the 3 ways that it helps. It helps them enhance their brand, it helps them punch far above their weight in terms of the supply to big retailers like Waitrose and M&S, that they have that those sustainability credentials. It helps them save costs, so they recover heat from their brewing process to heat their buildings in Southwold. So they save costs, they lightweight their bottles, that's reduced cost. But it's also about business resilience. So they're concerned about water, how they're going to get enough water in East Anglia, how they're going to get enough hops to grow enough hops and barley to supply them to make beer. So one way in which I teach people to think about sustainability is to draw one of these, which is called a materiality matrix. This is from a cement company, so nothing to do with your sector, but it's very simple but quite effective. On the left hand side you have a scale that's about importance to your stakeholders, so that might be, you might be thinking about your customers, you might be thinking about investors, you might be thinking about local government, for example, and then along the bottom axis the importance to you as an organization. This is an example of a materiality matrix from Hilton. So this is their 2019 materiality assessment. So you can see that they've chunked it up into blocks. So what's at the top right corner is obviously the things that are most important to the business and the most important in terms of external expectations from stakeholders. So they would be the ones that you'd be focused on tackling as a priority. We've all got limited time, we've all got limited resources. So which are the issues that we'd want to tackle first? And that's what we're just going to have a quick go at doing now. So I hope you're all familiar with using the annotate tool. But if you're not, hunt around on your screen. There should be a little button that says annotate on your screen with a little drawing of a pencil. If you click on that and click on the little button that says text, you should be able to write something on the screen. Don't know if you've used this before, or if this is going to be too tricky. Can you find your annotate tool? We practiced this earlier, but maybe it's harder to see in a webinar. No? Okay, I'm going to go through my list then in the interest of time. So, oh, it's not going now. Sorry. I've drawn dots on mine. There we go. So here we go. Here's my list. So on the environmental side, what have we got? Energy use of hotels, GHG emissions, waste, water, biodiversity, sustainable procurement, air and noise pollution, water and land contamination. So you might disagree or agree with me. This isn't a particular order. This is just me saying these are the types of environmental issues that I'd expect you to be appearing on your materiality matrix. But be interesting for you to think about which of these would be top right corner and which of these would be further down, maybe from the perspective of your business or the perspective of stakeholders. And then on the social side, diversity and inclusion, training and education, health and safety, human rights, which would include issues around modern slavery and human traffic, anti-corruption, community engagement. So if you were coming on a course with me, we'd spend quite a bit of time constructing this materiality matrix, thinking about the different lenses that we could look at this from, different stakeholder lenses, thinking about how your internal management team would prioritize these issues in relation to each other. So I'm just going to talk about a few examples from each of these to finish off. So energy consumption, typically 3 to 6%, as I've read, of your operating costs, and 60% of your carbon emissions. So a big target to go after in terms of emissions. And when we're thinking about legislation and the impact that government might have as a stakeholder, if a carbon tax comes in over the next couple of years, which is very likely to, it's being talked about at the level of £100 per tonne of carbon. So if you know what your carbon emissions are in CO2 tonne equivalent, times it by £100, that's how much more it will cost you to emit carbon on top of the actual energy costs in the future. So a big hotel group host hotels has just introduced an internal carbon price of £100. So they're saying, I know this doesn't exist yet in legislation, but when we look at our investment appraisals, we're going to add in £100 a tonne as a carbon cost, so that we're getting ourselves ready for when that actually is going to be a true cost to our business. And then there's obviously a lot you can do around energy efficiency or use of alternative energy sources and lighting. So that's just a list of practical things that can be done around energy consumption. So when it comes to waste, a really useful framework, I think, for thinking about stuff and how we don't use it enough, how we don't use products to their full for their full life, is the circular economy. So you might have seen this before from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So this talks about 2 cycles. On the left-hand side, the green one talks about the cycles of biological stuff. So this is food would fall into this category. So this is saying that we should try and create circles so that waste food is used for another purpose, whether that's composting, biogas, energy, etc. And then the blue side on the right-hand side is for non-organic stuff. And the line down the middle is saying normally what we do is we mine something, we turn it into something, we use it, and then we throw it away. What we should do is try and create these loops. The smallest loop is maintenance. So the best thing you can do is maintain something so it lasts longer. Or the next loop is reuse it, give it a second life. And then if you can't do that, you can refurbish or manufacture it. And the actual sort of last case option is to recycle something, because that still takes more energy and resource to do. So food waste is a massive issue globally. This is linked to carbon emissions, because if food is wasted, obviously the carbon that's been created or used in making that food has been wasted, no purpose. And globally, 1/3 of food produced gets wasted. So this is a really interesting example of a company we're working with at Cranfield called Winnow Solutions, and this is a case study of some work they've done with IKEA. So this is a technology that they're installing in kitchens, so that chefs and their teams can much more closely monitor what type of food is being wasted. So it has an effect of reducing waste, improving planning, saving money, and also allowing chefs to develop their menus, because obviously you get insight into the food that's not being eaten versus the food that is being eaten. So you can see the statistics there in terms of their project with IKEA in the UK and Ireland, cutting food waste by almost 40% and saving a lot of cost as well. So a really good example of how an environmental benefit can also drive economic benefits. Another example, this is talking about linens. So as you probably know, cotton has a huge environmental impacts in terms of the pesticides used, the water used, but also poor working practices as well. So the more that we can move towards recycled cotton, giving it a second life, or organic cottons which use less pesticide, less water, the better. And this is an example of another company that we work with at Cranfield. This is a lady that came through our entrepreneur program to set up a laundry called TDS Commercial, which uses ozone process in laundry, which means you don't have to heat the water, you use less chemicals, but also things last longer. So you get more cycles before something has to be thrown away. So if you think about those loops in the circular economy picture, it's better to get recycled inputs. It's better to repair and maintain some things so they last longer, including through laundry. And then at the end, there's some examples there of some hotels that have actually used their end-of-life linens to make them into a different product. And waste, other sorts of waste, single-use plastic, construction waste, mattresses and furniture, these are all waste streams that you need to deal with in your environments. And this is just a really simple example of something we did at Cranfield to help with our recycling processes. So people read left to right. So we started off with what they wanted to do first on the left and had the normal bin on the right. And then we stuck an example of what they throw in each bin to help people understand what went where, and that helps improve the quality of the recycling. So simple steps can be very effective. Water, another big impact. I won't go through those examples there because I know we're running out of time. And this is a really interesting example. This is some work that's been done by a social psychologist called Cialdini and his team. And this is about an example from a hotel, so I thought it'd be interesting. This is all about the idea that social identity can help motivate change. So you can make changes in your hotels, but you also need your customers to change their behavior. And what this showed was, the more specifically you target a particular social group, the better they'll perform. So the experiment was to put signs in rooms saying, please help our hotel to reduce water use by reusing your towels. And then they had another experiment where they said, please help floor 3 to help reduce its use of water in washing. And then another example, please help room 36 to reduce its impact. And surprisingly, the more specific they got about which social group you're part of, the bigger the impact, the bigger the change in behavior. So even these artificial social groups, room 36 isn't really a social group, but that had a better impact than talking about the hotel as itself. Biodiversity, you know, most hotels own big areas of land. This is what we've done with our biodiversity on Cranfield. How can you make use of the land that you own in a more positive way to encourage wildlife? So rather than paving things over, can you encourage more biodiversity in the grounds that you own and operate? And responsible sourcing and human rights. So making sure that you take account of the social and environmental impacts in your supply chains. Diversity and inclusion, it's not just about what you measure, it's also about how you implement it. So this is an example from Host Hotels CSR report again, about striving for increased diversity inclusion and making it something that the board is actually accountable for. And finally, community engagement. So again, another example from Host Hotel, who actually assess local economic growth and sustainable development initiatives in the communities in which they operate, because they understand that healthy communities help to support a healthy business. They also help you find and develop talent and engage your employees. So more engaged employees, but more productive employees. So I'm going to finish there. So we've got time for questions. There's a slide here that directs you to our sustainability web pages at Cranfield. We have lots of webinars like this happening with guest speakers through the year. And just to bring your attention to October the 14th, we're having an event about sustainability in the beverage sector, hopefully face-to-face at Cranfield. So if you want to join our mailing list, do go onto our webpage where you can do that. But I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you for listening. You're on mute, Nick.
There you go. One day I'll get this right. Thank you so much for that. That was really, really interesting. A lot of information to take out and take in. So, and it just shows hoteliers are useless at certain elements of a Zoom call, that they can't do little squiggle on the top, but that's fine.
No, well, that was a bit of a big ask. Yeah.
Well, yeah, this is true. And I guess we'll just have some questions coming through, I'm sure, very shortly. I mean, as a hotel, we've obviously gone through this pandemic, and as I said to you earlier, that I just feel that we've gone backwards 2 years or so. We feel very strongly about sustainability and what we do to the local environment. But all of a sudden, you've got these wonderful things: hand sanitizer in plastic, chuck away. You got the mask, chuck away. And it's just re-educating everyone of, okay, right, we need to start getting back to basics. Even with your waste bin system. I mean, we've got that at the hotel. The amount of times you look down and there's a plastic carton in the food waste and that sort of thing. We've got something called an orca, which loves to eat bits and pieces of food and turns it into normal waste. They're again putting the right things in that, otherwise the machine breaks down. The machine constantly, since we've been back, breaks down because we've just got to re-educate. And I think that is the key, that we've just got to go back to basics again and just really talk to people and say, look, you know, let's and it's taken that, you know, with all your little bins and what to put in what, it's actually taking the manager over lunchtime to stand there for a few days just going, that goes in that one, that goes in that one. Not the best use of our time, considering managers of
no, but I think people absolutely model behaviors that they see, so I think that does make a really big difference. And I think I think I found this in retail, because you have a big staff, we had big staff turnover, we had lots of part-time staff. It was quite hard to keep that message consistent. So seeing someone out there doing it, I think, is a really good way of tackling that, and just making sure that it's mentioned. It doesn't have to be like a big speech all the time, but just at the beginning of every team meeting, if you had one item that relates to sustainability, just, you know, a 2-minute item, just to keep dripping that this actually is of importance. And I mean, I think if you can demonstrate that it's important to customers in some ways as well, so connecting it to good customer service, I think is helpful as well. And that's what we found around our community activities at Argos, is the stores that were strong in community engagement were the stores that were best at customer service as well, and they drove they're the most profitable stores. So there's definitely links, I think, between feeling proud and engaged with your sustainability program and the customer service that you offer. But I do recognise that things like single-use PPE are difficult, and I don't have an easy answer for that.
Hopefully we won't need them in the future.
No.
So there's a couple of questions. What have we got here? One is from Edward. Where do you see sustainability in areas of hospitality design and development?
I don't know what hospitality design and development means. Edward?
Maybe need to enlarge on that a little more.
Building hotels. Yes. So yeah, I don't know much about it, Edward. And I was thinking about this when I was preparing the presentation, that I think some big hotel chains in particular are designing buildings that are more energy efficient, more well insulated, make use of natural lighting, make use of natural air supply. And I think that's really important going forward. But I think in the UK, that's such a small proportion of the buildings that we're dealing with. I think it's, you know, the big impacts come from doing better things with older buildings, I think, for us in the UK. So I think, you know, investments in insulation, investments in different lighting, investments in just efficiency of the energy system that you're using already are going to make the biggest difference, certainly in the UK.
Okay. Okay, next one is, and in restaurants, same question.
So I think, yeah, alongside, I'd love to know what you think about more plant-based diets and the extent to which you can nudge consumers towards different behaviours there. I don't know if you've experimented with that, Nick. Just rebalancing menus, because so obviously I talked about food waste. I think that's a massive opportunity, and I think that's a really good win in terms of cost saving as well. And that company Winnow is a really good one, I think, in that they're actually doing that. They now got an AI driven version. So the version I showed you on the screen, you're going to have to press a button to say what food you're throwing away. They've got a new version now which can learn what food looks like while you're throwing it away, which I haven't seen that in action yet, which sounds amazing. But, you know, with that quiz I did with the amount of animals that are on the earth and what we know about vegetarianism making a big impact on helping with climate change, what has been your experience with?
Yeah, I think from our point of view, and I know that Robbie on one of the other last webinar touched on it. I kind of think the days of having a vegetarian menu, a vegan menu, this menu, that menu is gone. It's one menu and it's all inclusive. So, you know, we've got in our Wigmore, little plug there, Wigmore pub, a plant-based burger, which is fantastic, and it's just under the sales of the normal burger, but it's a fantastic dish, amazing. And then we're looking at, okay, what other areas can we do? And just, it shouldn't be adding things on gimmicky for the sake of it.
I think it'd be good to see the order change. The vegetarian one tends to still be at the bottom of the list, I find.
Yeah.
So it'll be steak, lamb, fish, vegetarian.
Yeah, I mean, but it is just putting it and making it not a separate thing and making it really part of a sensational menu. And I think it's all about the chefs coming up with new ideas and ways of presenting and saying, look, this dish is absolutely brilliant, and seeing what happens from there. I think we've got some more questions, which is good. So
just a final point on food as well is I think the importance of the connection between local sourcing and supporting local communities, and creating shorter supply chains. I'm sure, you know, people have found in COVID that the shorter your supply chain, the better you know your suppliers and your supply chain, the more resilient your supply chain is to crises. So I think that's crucial for the in
absolutely. One person's asked, could you ask what the single most important thing we could do as individuals to help address global warming?
Okay, so there's some big ones. Changing what you eat is a big one. Your car is obviously a huge one. So whether that's moving to electric or car sharing or thinking about other modes of transport. Tumble dryers are a quick win. So mine broke 6 months ago. I haven't got it fixed. I've put my line outside. That, things in the home which use a lot of electricity, the tumble dryer is probably number one on that list. And then the other one is heating and insulation. So if you've got an older house, the best things you can do are loft insulation, maybe even cavity wall insulation. And if you're moving into a new house or building a new house, or you need to upgrade your boiler, don't put a gas boiler in. So gas boilers will eventually have to go. Obviously, there's debate about how soon that ban comes in. So you need to be getting more familiar with air source heat pumps and maybe even exploring hydrogen boilers. So yeah, those are the top things. So
maybe buying a house 2 years ago with a gas boiler wasn't the right option. Okay.
No, probably not. No.
Okay, then Sue Williams, thank you for a great presentation. May I ask, have you any advice how to bring all your suppliers with you as we need to decarbonize our businesses?
So I think supply, so it depends. Yeah, so people who've worked really well with suppliers, M&S have done a really good job working with their suppliers. They've got a big set of suppliers, so they had to create a bit of a process where people had, bronze, silver, gold status. So I think starting to ask the question of your suppliers, knowing what questions you want to ask them and starting to ask them consistently is really good, but also supporting them in that process. So not just saying, this is what I want you to do, I've got no idea how you're going to do it. But so running, for example, workshops for your suppliers, even if you don't know all that much about the solutions, they can learn from each other. And that's something M&S have done really well, is they run supplier workshops around different themes. So Adnams, for example, shared what they learned with other M&S beer and wine suppliers. So asking the right questions, giving them time to respond though, especially if it's agricultural suppliers, the time to change can take a while to change. So being able to support them through that change rather than just not buy from them, I think is quite critical. But then in some areas, I think it's about there is kind of some yes no's. So for example, are you going to take the decision not to buy sustainably sourced seafood, for example? And there might be some suppliers that you just do want to cut out if they don't meet those criteria, if there's alternatives available.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then, I think a lot of us, the top hotels and a lot of hotels use X amount of suppliers, which are the same old faces of meat suppliers and bits and pieces, unless you're trying to use local as possible. But in London, that's quite difficult. But I guess if all of us ask similar questions, that's going to bring us and just get that mindset and that talking together as a group. So, I know what suppliers we use here, and there's a number of other hotels use exactly the same. If we all start talking to them and getting a better picture of what happens and how we can do and improve, that's a great idea. So yeah, absolutely.
And that's something you might be able to use the inn holders as a forum for, in terms of starting to evolve that set of questions that you're asking. Yeah. Obviously it gets harder then if those suppliers aren't performing, they're not improving, they're not moving closer to what you want them to be. And then there does come a point where you have to say, if you don't meet those standards in the next year or 18 months, however long you want to give them, then we will look somewhere else.
I think you give them the opportunity. And let's face it, if you're dealing with 50 to 100 different hotels in London or UK wide, and you've got a possibility of losing them, you're going to probably pull your finger out and do something good. So yeah. Okay. Let's see, Rob, what's your view on hospitality and air travel, especially to previous untouched parts of the world? How could that be done more sustainability?
Yeah, so it's a tricky question, and my only real sort of contact with this has been, I've been working with the RSPB, so they've been thinking about the advertising policy in their nature magazine, because they advertise a lot of tourism, and some of that tourism isn't particularly sustainable. So they're doing something similar actually in their magazine, where they're asking for more reassurance from their suppliers. So there are suppliers out there, there are operators out there that have much more robust measurement of their impacts, and they are trying to reduce their impacts and make that tourism more so it's respectful of the places that people are going, rather than exploiting the places that they're going. So I think that's again a bit of a journey. Are you talking from the perspective of operating a hotel in a delicate area?
That's a good. I think it's more.
I don't know where you work.
Yeah, Rob works in the central London. You might just write, because he's usually quite quick, but maybe we go on to another question and come back to that.
Yes.
He might have
no, I'd like to. Yeah.
Okay. Then Sue Williams again. I hear intelligent buildings will be a thing of the future. What do you know, or do you know, or?
Well, there is lots of work going on around sustainable cities and intelligent buildings. So these are buildings which adjust their temperature, their lighting, without us having to do anything about it. And that's what, energy management systems have been gradually dragging us that way, haven't they, in terms of having motion sensor lighters and more responsive thermostats. So I do, if you've read the book, Charles Schwab's written a book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which talks about the massive changes in technology that are going to happen in the next 8 or 9 years. So he would say absolutely. So smart devices, wearable devices in buildings that are going to manage everything for us. I think it's very likely that's going to happen, but I don't know much about the technology. Is that something that we want? Is that something that we're going to let into our lives? So that's interesting in terms of these interconnection of issues. You could imagine a future where devices do allocate energy in the most efficient way, but that means that we have to give away a lot of data for that to happen. Yeah, so as Sue said, like our phones.
Yeah. What impact do you think COP26 might have?
COP26. Well, I'm optimistic. If that's Sue again, I'm optimistic. I think it could go two ways. Because of COVID, I think people have got other problems on their plates, and they're obviously concerned with economic recovery. But I think everyone does also feel that we need to build resilience, as I've said at the beginning, so we can cope better with future crises. And I think those two are kind of playing off against each other. And I think the clever way of doing it is to try and to create economic stimulus that has climate change and economic and social issues as a part of it. So more money goes to investment that grows our economy, but also does it in a way that helps with the environment. So I'm hoping that that's what the UK government at least will do, is say, we know we need to stimulate the economy, but we can do that in ways that also drives sustainability benefits. So I hope that's what will happen. Obviously it was really horrifying when they were thinking of signing off that new coal station in Cumbria, and so luckily that got buried, because I think that would have made it very difficult for us as the host of COP26 to
That's true.
stand by our commitments.
Rob again, Rob's on fire. Is seafood really sustainable, or is it the next wave to come?
Well, interestingly, my 14-year-old son just did a school project on fishing, and the fact that some sustainable seafood is more sustainable than others. So there's different. Marine Stewardship Council is quite well respected, but I think you're right that the way that we're sort of pillaging the seas is the next big topic, because I think it's kind of not been at the front of our awareness as consumers. So I think Robert, it will be the next frontier.
Okay.
And there's also the issues with microplastics in the sea coming through food supply chains, which I think hasn't been fully explored yet either, the impact that will have on human health. So we're all going to end up eating no fish and no meat.
Well, that's not a bad world.
No.
Not a bad world. We are speaking Rob again. So the earlier question he was asking about untouched parts of the world, I was asking in terms of both as consumer and industry. We seem to be constantly moving to unique experiences in far-flung places. So yeah.
I think there's definitely an argument for keeping parts of the world truly wild. So I think there was a campaign recently about keeping a third of the world wild. So I think that this kind of always pushing the boundaries into where we go absolutely has to stop. But at the same time, I think the counter argument to that is giving people awareness of the issues that are being faced in other places around the world can help, because that helps to give you empathy. If you can see what's happening and you can see the suffering and you can see the impacts, you know, a lot of people who've been converted to thinking about sustainability more seriously have actually experienced something. They've seen a lake that's dried up, etc. But can we give people those experiences through VR or virtual reality? Can we take people places without them actually going there? And that seems almost more possible now, doesn't it? Now that we've lived our lives so much more in the virtual. So I think that there definitely has to be a balance. I don't think we can keep pushing the frontiers, pushing into the wild. And I think we can, you know, I think we can explore the wild spaces that are closer to us. If we get up and walk in our country.
Well, I think that's one of the things during the pandemic is really everyone has ran, cycled, walking, yeah. You know, at the end of the day, they've had to. So 100%. I think that's all the questions I've got. Well, I suppose one thing I've thought about during this, I had a coffee morning with a couple of the team about a week ago, and someone asked, what's our 5-year plan? And I'm like, yeah, good luck. I've got no clue. But one thing's for sure, I think our next year plan definitely, we are, like I said, sustainable, and we aim to be a really sustainable hotel, but there is definitely things that we should be putting into plan for next year as best we can, and really move it forward. So I think that's important, because I think this has really channeled your mind back into thinking, you know, there is a bigger picture. We will get through this pandemic, fingers crossed, and we will move forward. But to do that, we need to do it in a certain way, that this is one of the key ways that we need to do it. So yeah, my
top tip is to ask other people for help as well.
Yeah,
find someone who's done it. I mean, people who work in the sustainability field are quite generous, actually, with they don't see it as like, oh, I'm a competitor, I'm not going to tell you. It's definitely more open. So if you can work together across the industry, if you can work with people who've done it, learn from each other's mistakes, but also look for expertise. So if you want expertise in water use, or you want expertise, there are lots of like non-profit organizations out there that can help you. So don't try and do it on your own, and learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's collaboration. And I suppose over your years of working with all the companies and everything, who does it best? Who would you think, Jesus, they've got it really, really well and tick all the boxes? Who's on the right track?
Well, the one I cite, but it's a very extreme example because it was set up as a sustainable company, is Patagonia, because they were born sustainable. So they've always had that as part of their DNA. I think it's harder if you're trying to transform. I mean, one of the biggest transformation stories is Interface Carpets, who are a carpet company who decided that their CEO decided that he didn't want to be having a damaging impact on the environment, so changed the whole business model to being a carpet leasing model. So they created a circular economy. So they got their carpets back at the end of their life and transformed them. So that's an example of a business that actually really radically changed its business model because it wanted to do things more sustainably. But you know, I don't think we can all aspire to be that radical. I think that there's huge value in doing what you do, but doing it better, more efficiently, in a less wasteful way.
Super.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is about it. So it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for taking your time out for today to pitch to us. Always good to see so many questions at the end of it. So that means people are engaged and enjoying it, and really good. I have got one more thing to say, a bit of housekeeping, otherwise Wallace will kill me again. Just to say that, you know, the MI mentoring scheme, if the members have not done so already, please email myself or Wallace and sign up to be a mentor, or suggest potential mentees as well. So please read the email that everyone got and activate. Thank you very much. And
so I hope to get to meet some of you at Cranfield in the future.
Absolutely, I'm sure you will. But anytime you're in town, do pop into Langham. As seen on TV.
That's very kind of you. Thanks, Nick.
Not a problem at all. Wonderful. Have a great day, everyone. And
Thank you.
Take care.